Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk through the autobiography In Order to Live, a North Korean girl's journey to freedom. I'm just going to read the blurb here, even though I don't have the book with me. This is the incredible true story of 13-year-old Yeonmi Park, who risked her life when she and her family fled North Korea, revealing what it was like to live under a brutally repressive regime, which starved and terrorized its people. Yeonmi tells of her family's courageous decision to escape and of the extraordinary, heartbreaking journey that followed, culminating in a daring nighttime trek across the Gobi Desert to freedom. So, this book's not an easy read. It tells of Yeonmi Park's journey to escape the brutal oppression of her native North Korea. At times, it's impressive, heartbreaking, and makes you appreciate how good your life really is, and how bad some people truly have it. The book begins by detailing daily life in North Korea. It paints a tragic picture of the struggle of her family, of the people of North Korea, every day. Even before 10 years old, she would see dead bodies in the street, and every day is a struggle for food, warmth, and safety. So freedom's never really existed for people in North Korea in this scenario. Aside from the black market dealings and activities, Kim Jong Il's socialist regime deprives its citizens of what they need. It's not only the people who lack what they need either. Even the big city hospitals lack enough equipment, so there's not enough for supplies to be disposable. So that term is actually alien. She writes, bandages are washed and reused. Nurses go from room to room using the same syringe on every patient. They know this is dangerous, but they have no choice. When I came to South Korea, I was amazed when the doctors threw away the tools they had just used on me. People take to stealing, eating their pets and scrounging for food. It's an everyday struggle. She writes on this. There were so many desperate people on the streets crying for help that you had to shut off your heart, or the pain would be too much. After a while, you don't care anymore. And that is what hell is like. So, the kind of problems faced by citizens in North Korea is multifarious, right? There's not enough raw material, resources for everyone. There's no support from the government. So, people are just stuck in a constant struggle. And to maintain this kind of power, North Korea brainwashes its citizens. And I think in this book we get a really good picture of that because you're hearing it from a primary source who's experienced it. Yeonmi discusses how some people she knows are fanatics of the regime, whereas her father is like Winston from Orwell's 1984, conscious of what's going on but powerless to prevent it. In essence, the book's character development as such is the progression of Yeonmi's mental battles over the course of her story to overcome years of indoctrination. She speaks of illegally managing to watch the Titanic. But while the outside media offered me a glimpse of a larger world, very different from the one I occupied, I never imagined I could live life the characters in those movies. I couldn't look at the people on the screen and think they were real, or allow myself to envy their lives. The propaganda we were fed inoculated me from any lessons I might apply to my own life. It also made me numb to the suffering that was going on all around me, as the famine was taking its terrible toll. So her story progresses to relaying how her family becomes tarnished as criminals due to her father's involvement in the black market. So he takes up selling on the black market in order to get just some money to survive. And it's a huge risk because if caught, multiple generations of the family could be punished. Transgressions against the regime often lead to not only the family itself being punished if, they're there to punish, but, any relatives would get punished, anyone who might know of what was going on. So there's huge risks, not just to yourself. Even amongst the more obvious traumas and desperation in finding enough food, there is the heartbreaking story of Yeonmi's involvement with a boy who she knows she cannot stay with because of their differences between the North Korean classes in society. So if they married, he would be tarnished as part of her criminal family. And she suddenly knows their relationship can't go anywhere. So they're basically left with an untenable situation, which I won't spoil, but it's quite a sad story, essentially. And that's kind of a microcosm of the whole book, because how do you rate such a story? Obviously, as a non-fiction kind of tale about a real-world situation, there isn't much need necessarily for imagery, and the story kind of speaks for itself, especially as it is a true one. But Yeonmi relays the struggles of life and the trauma she faced from human traffickers, in an effective way. She tries to give insight into what she was thinking as events progressed, and I think by her own admission, she didn't necessarily always make the right decisions. But from the hopelessness of the situation and contemplating suicide to having to completely rethink her perception of the world that has been drilled into her since, she was born by the North Korean propaganda. So the story, as we've discussed, it demonstrates a family having to struggle to survive together. And the suffering is such that Yeonmi's too trusting, and she kind of gets taken advantage of, and the whole family does, several times. But she makes for an engaging character. There's, despite all this adversity and the flaws of the characters, you're rooting for them. It weaves illustrations of Yeonmi's dictated ignorance in terms of sex, plenitude of food in other countries, and the freedom of life in other countries succinctly. There's a huge contrast between what North Koreans experience and what's actually happening on the outside world, but all of this is hidden from them. It talks about the strained relations of a family stretched due to all these struggles they constantly face. But despite all this, there are moments of relief. She talks of her joy of getting to visit a big city for the first time, or how brilliant a strawberry tastes when she manages to have one for the first time. The book is about suffering for a large part, but there are moments of respite. And towards the end, there is a degree of absolution from all this pain. It's the kind of book I think everyone should read, to remind ourselves that in some places the world is experiencing unimaginable suffering. And hopefully it brings attention and change to problems like this. But you can't help but feel for people living in it now and in the future, and people that have lived it and suffered it. So in terms of final score, it's the kind of book that leaves an indelible mark upon you. It's unique and heartbreaking. But it's hard to criticise, because of that uniqueness. It doesn't really need to be written spectacularly because of the spectacular story. In a fictional book, we would say it has a brilliant plot, but as a non-fiction story, it's one of suffering that needs to be told and is unforgettable. And it's a page-turner throughout. Yeonmi, fortunately, now speaks out about her experiences and lives in the USA. I'm giving this one a final score of 8 out of 10. It's a great read, it's a hard read, but it's one you probably should read. So thanks for listening, please like and subscribe. There'll be plenty more books of this ilk coming up.